We're going to outbeard and outcat everyone tonight. We have got the Oh My God cat off YouTube, which, if you haven't seen it, it's had over 20 million views. And there's some amazing spoofs of Justin Bieber, for example, doing the literally like that. And no social media presentation would be complete without a cat, no doubt. The thing that senior clients ask me sort of most often is, so what are other clients spending their money on other than traditional media? What's growing, across the sort of Engine family? Is it data? Is it sponsorship? And frankly, if sponsorship isn't growing this year, then God help us all. But the answer, is I don't even have to speak to anyone to know. I just have to look on the second floor of our building, because these guys, Jam, who are our social media and mobile agency, social media has quite literally eaten my desk, because I've had to leave where I was sitting because they've grown so quickly. So in the last 2 years, I've gone from 22 people to 85. And that's because clients have seen that anyone with a keyboard and an iPhone can become a broadcaster and can have an opinion. And then as soon as they've worked that out, the second question they ask is, why should we do it, and how does it work? And they very quickly get onto, and is my money working? So if you look at the last 3 years and the interest in this area, I mean, social media as a concept has been around since 2004, but it's really only in the last 3 years, if you look at the Google search stats since 2008, that the concepts of social media measurement and social media ROI have even come into being. So it's brand new, and it's really in the last 12 months that clients have been really, I suppose, demanding, quite rightly, proof of how this is working, and asking us to help guide them in how they should measure it. So I then come back from those meetings and talk to Jamie, who's incredibly well placed to advise them, because he grew up in traditional advertising, then worked in a media agency and is now in social media, and say, we need to have some frameworks. So that's what we've been working on. We've had put a lot of resource behind it to try and give, I suppose, really a useful point of view about how we can work out not only which half is working in the old phrase, but also trying to advise clients on why and how they should carry on spending their money.
Thank you. So I think it's worth just starting with some context. We all know social media is massive. So Facebook allegedly will hit its kind of billion users in September. And there's tons of stuff on social media, on social networks. This is one of my favorite posts, which is the kid says, "Dad's on Facebook, WTF." And the father says, "Henry, what's WTF? Welcome to Facebook, Dad," says the kid. And that kind of sums it up for me. It says it's sort of, there's some of us who maybe don't understand it as well as others. But that's rapidly changing. And I think measurement and how we kind of need to approach measurement as industry is really growing up, and growing up at rapid speed. So it's worth sort of saying, a couple of years ago, and for a long time, the focus has always been about friends and fans and followers. So this was Starbucks, the first brand to reach 10 million followers on Facebook in July 2010. And it was kind of big fanfare. And for brand owners and for marketeers, fans are quite a new, I guess, a kind of new thing, because we could see that people genuinely liked, or we thought genuinely liked, our brand, and that fans and the kind of whole follower thing and the number of followers has been a really big thing around social. And people have said, okay, we've got lots of fans, and there's kind of a fan grab. Starbucks now have around about 41 million. Coke, probably the biggest Facebook following, has about 43 million followers on Facebook. But what I want to sort of say is it's completely not about the number of fans or followers that you've got. The value of a fan, if they do nothing, is nothing. And I think that's really important to kind of bear in mind in where we're going these days. Because there are really some big established and fast-growing networks. So Facebook in the UK, 26 million users. Most of you will all be kind of familiar with those big networks. Twitter, 6 million users. Interestingly, MySpace was big, really big, 18 million a few years ago, is slowly coming back. But equally, there are the kind of new kids, the relatively new kids on the block. So Tumblr, 3 million users. Instagram, you all would have heard about Instagram. I was listening to the Today program talking about Instagram and why Facebook bought Instagram for $1 billion, if that goes through. They've got about 50 million users globally, about 500 million photographs on it, and about 500,000 users in the UK. I have no idea why. I mean, that valuation is just beyond the pale. But there are other areas and other networks that also are growing fast. Pinterest, if you're kind of doing up a house, or the cliche is if you're having a wedding, you'll be on Pinterest. Draw Something is probably the new starter. So Draw Something has been going for about, I'm not sure, well, it's come into the market very recently, and they're putting on about 1 million users a day. So they got to the first million in 9 days. They're at 50 million at the moment. That's the last stats. They were bought by Zynga for 200 million, and allegedly they're generating about $200,000 of ad revenue every single day. So if I was Zuckerberg, I would have bought Draw Something rather than Tumblr. But I'm sure he's got a plan. The point is that there are lots of networks, and those networks are becoming new, and there are lots of opportunities. But equally, there's just a huge amount of data. So this is from a Facebook brand page. I'm sure lots of you will have brand pages. But when you take the data from your brand page and you export it into Excel, you get 65 tabs of data showing the performance of your brand page. When you look at your post performance, you get another 7 tabs of data. That data is being updated every single day. So there's a huge amount of data to deal with. If you're thinking about measuring things in Twitter, you can look at the Twitter content, you can look at the number of followers, you can look at who they're following, you can look at retweets, you can look at app mentions, you look at peer index scores, clout scores, the list goes on. This is data puke, and this presents a real kind of challenge, I think, for brands and for agencies. And I think the challenge is, what do you measure? What do you look at? What's important? And we've spent a reasonable amount of time trying to figure this out, and trying to figure this out with the clients that we work with. And the first way we do this is we sit down and we obviously understand the client's business objectives and their marketing objectives and their social media objectives, but then we list out all the various different data points and we map them out and we think about what's going to be valuable, what's going to be less valuable, what's going to affect it in the kind of short term, and what's going to drive business in the long term. And it's going to be different for lots of different brands. But the point is, you need to sit down and think about and list out and get all those data points. And ultimately, you need to apply a very simple question, which is the so what test. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for our business? Because I'd argue stats like followers, potentially, certainly like friends of followers, which is a big Facebook metric, are pretty worthless. Certainly, kind of following to followers ratio, again, pretty useless. So we sit down and we figure out what works, and we always kind of apply that so what test. And by doing this, we've spent a bit of time and we've developed what we call the kind of the measurement scorecard. And it basically covers 6 areas. And I want to talk through each of these 6 areas. The important thing to say about the measurement scorecard is it's actually focused on participation. It genuinely looks at what people are doing, and it looks at and is focused on what happens after you do a post, a tweet. And that's really important. We've kind of applied that so what test, and we're looking at those things. Equally, and this is fundamental, is that it applies to whatever social network you are on. Okay? So whether I'm on Facebook, whether I've got a page on Pinterest or Twitter, this framework works across those. And there are kind of 2 areas on the framework. And the first is around engagement. So we really focus on not followers, but actually what those people do. And we've broken it down into kind of 3 areas. The first is an applause rate. So this is the rate at which content is endorsed by users, by the audience. So that might be on Facebook, the number of likes, or on Google+, the kind of plus ones, or on Twitter, favorites. And on Twitter, not many people favorite tweets, but it's important. That is, people are endorsing that content. The second area is amplification. So this is really simple. This is the rate in which your content is being shared across the social graph, across the social web. So the number of retweets, number of shares per post in Facebook. And the last area is around conversation. And this really looks at the rate in which you're engaging with your audience, and your audience are engaging with you. So the number of comments on your posts, the number of replies. So they're all really focused on engagement and what actual people are doing. And that means that actually some of the numbers on these rates are going to be really, really small compared to, the 40 million likes. And that's important as well. Beyond engagement, we look at sentiment. And so a lot of you guys, I'm sure, have heard about buzz monitoring. So buzz monitoring is technology, software that listens to conversations about your brands, about products, about markets on the web. And lots of companies like Radian6, like Brandwatch, and there are lots of kind of new software providers providing great tools. And they genuinely are great tools. And they can show you the volume, and they can show you where those posts are happening. And to give you an example, so for Renault, there are probably about 500 posts a week. For Sky, there are probably about 7,000 a day. So there's a vast difference depending on your brand. But one of the things all those tools looks at is sentiment. So is the post positive, neutral, or negative? And all these software companies claim with kind of automated sentiment that it's really important. The problem is that the automated sentiment doesn't really show the true picture. So what we do is we track sentiment over time, and we track it kind of as a net sentiment score. Some of you will be kind of familiar with a net promoter score. So we look at the kind of positive versus the negative. We exclude the neutral, because often neutral is a huge amount of spam or news. And we track that over time. And interestingly, you can see, depending on what you're doing, depending on your activity, how you improve that sentiment over time. So some markets, so the broadband market, sentiment is really, really negative. So if your broadband breaks, funny thing is, one of the first things you do is you go and tweet and you complain like hell about it. How you get online is probably a question. You're using your mobile, you're going to work. But sentiment is really, really negative. Within the automotive sector, on the whole, sentiment is kind of higher. And one of the things, so working with Renault, is we've been able to shift that sentiment over time. And as I said, we kind of look at about 500 posts a week. We probably respond to about 2. Well, there are about 20 to 30 a day that are important that we're flagging to the clients, and we've developed a kind of system called Jam Track, our own dashboard that sits on their mobile, sits on their tablets, and is over the web, but it flags the important posts, because lots of them aren't important. And importantly, we're looking and we're giving them a manual sentiment score. So this is a test that we did looking at a huge amount of data for one of our clients, and we put the kind of best of the machines, the best of the software, up against human analysis. So I think there was about 6,000 posts. We've got one of our kind of skinny jean wearing people to go through, and it wasn't particularly interesting, but it just showed how wrong the machines are. So you can see negative sentiment from the machine shows that there were 7% negative, but actually when we did the proper analysis, 66% negative sentiment. There's a huge issue there. And if you pay attention to automated sentiment, you're going to get readings like this, because automated sentiment isn't good enough. And I think it's really important. There's a challenge for businesses about the resource it takes. If you're Sky, that's a huge amount of resource, and you have to find ways to kind of look at that. But would you necessarily kind of automate your brand tracker or your NPS? You wouldn't leave it to a machine to do that. And so, for the moment, we'd absolutely advocate looking at manual sentiment and looking at the kind of net sentiment score over time. So that's the kind of fourth area. The fifth is really about delivering media efficiency. Lots of people kind of talk a lot about social media as being cheap. You know, it's kind of free media. Clearly, it's not cheap. There's a cost. There's particularly a human cost to that. But one of the ways we look at and kind of judge the effectiveness of social media is kind of look at the equivalent cost. So particularly looking at the equivalent cost of that earned media. I just want to play you a quick video that will demonstrate, hopefully it works, a campaign that we did, and I'll show you. Basically ran in train stations, about 15 train stations over about 5 days. Normally you would buy the out of home, but what we did is we integrated it with Twitter. So people would tweet the billboards. We had a team that would look at their kind of profile, look at how influential they were, and look at what was interesting to them. And then we would tweet them back via the billboard and make recommendations about what they should watch on TV that night. The interesting thing is, how do you measure that and how do you give that a value? And so what we looked at is, okay, if we'd just done the billboard, if we'd just done a standard kind of execution, the cost per viewer would have been about £2.15. But by adding in Twitter, so it gave us a huge amount of increased coverage. So just out of home would have had a coverage around about 71,000. By adding in Twitter, because people then shared it, we got a coverage of around about 985,000. So cost per viewer at 18 pence. Now, granted, the kind of impressions on Twitter are different from impressions on a billboard, but that is just one way in terms of trying to really understand the kind of value of earned media. The second and the kind of last area in terms of the scorecard is driving action. Clearly, you know, what you have to do within social, ultimately we want people to do certain things, and those things will vary. They will be visit a website, they will be buy a product, or in the case of Samsung, we wanted people to watch a product review. And so when Samsung launched their kind of new GS2 phone, one of the things we thought about is, how do we get people to watch that product review in an interesting way? And one of the, if you're kind of familiar with tech and electronics, one of the kind of weird internet genres at the moment is unboxing videos. So tech bloggers will unbox, they'll get a new product in its box and they will unbox it and they will do a review of that product, be it a TV, be it a mobile phone. And these videos are really, really popular because they explain all the features. And so for Samsung, we thought, actually, how do we make that more interesting? How do we really get our message across, but kind of mash up the unboxing mechanic, the unboxing genre? So we came up with an idea of extreme unboxing. We took 6 of the kind of biggest tech bloggers from the Next Web and the like, and we said, we want you to do an unboxing video for us, but we want you to do it in a different way. The kind of purpose is, so he's one of the kind of preeminent tech bloggers. That video was hosted on the Next Web, also hosted on Samsung's YouTube page. When we looked at what it did in terms of ultimate kind of performance, clearly it drove a lot of views. So we had about 1 million views over 4 weeks across the 6 videos. And if you look at the applause rate, the amplification rate, and particularly the conversation rate, they were really, really high. So the conversation rate around about 5,400, that is phenomenal. I think there were about 23,000 tweets alone just about those videos, because they were really kind of built for social and using people who are kind of preeminent on the web. Scorecard is on engagement and value. A couple of other things. One is benchmarking. You need to figure a way to kind of benchmark your performance. And at the moment, it's enormously difficult. People are getting a lot better at it, and there are benchmarks. So if you look at Twitter, Twitter is one of the kind of areas, Twitter's all about speed. So the half-life, Bitly, kind of big kind of player in terms of links, they studied the half-life of a tweet, and it's about 2.8 hours. So that's how many people, after kind of 2.8 hours, half of them have clicked on that link. So Twitter is absolutely all about speed. And you need to kind of look at your tweets and see how long people are engaging with those tweets and how long after the posts they're clicking. Equally, someone talked about customer service via Twitter. This is a huge area. If you look at, and we've looked at a number of brands in terms of how they're delivering, how fast they're responding on Twitter. So the real kind of people who are excellent at this are doing it in an hour. And consumers are increasingly expecting that response time. So the likes of Orange in the UK, Sky are excellent at it, but particularly within the States, people like Comcast, Zappos, you tweet them, you'll get a response within under 10 minutes around customer service issues. Facebook, there are a couple of quick important stats to bear in mind about Facebook in terms of benchmarking. One is that the average status update is only seen by 16% of your audience. So and that's really, really important. You need to check with your agencies, with the people who manage your communities, are you exceeding that average? And if not, why not? And devise a content strategy to kind of increase and look to increase that. Equally, the talked about rate is between 1 and 2%. And that's really important to focus on because it ultimately affects the kind of edge rank. Couple of quick things to finally say. One is the whole idea of value of fan. The value of the fan, and there have been some studies, kind of Vitru and Sign Claps. One study said it was $3.60, another $136. Absolute nonsense. Don't pay any attention to the value of the fan. The value of a fan will absolutely differ completely for all your different brands. It will completely differ between each and every fan. And the value really is, there's going to be a direct value if they are going to buy stuff from you, and then there is an indirect value if they are influencing people. But the value of the fan debate, we sort of tend to ignore. Equally, when it comes to the kind of elephant in the room, what's the ROI of social? Well, it really depends, because it depends how you ultimately ask the question, I think. Because if you're interested in, and if you're providing your agency with real business objectives, and those objectives are about driving financial value, then yes, absolutely, you can figure out the ROI. But if you're focused on increasing, and if your objectives are about increasing budget, increasing buzz, or gaining customer insight, or improving brand perception, then you can't figure out the ROI. So we increasingly work with brands, and one brand we're working with, Tesco Mobile, we really focus on and get them to encourage to give us the absolute kind of business objectives, because that way you can figure out the ROI. And you need to look at it over time, and you need to look at it and be very specific over it. So this is one client that we work with. This is their Facebook performance over the last year. They've grown their fans, but importantly, they've driven over £4 million direct revenue from their Facebook presence, from Facebook. They track that based on the last click. So people are in Facebook and they're going to their shop online, and we're able to track it. So it doesn't look at the kind of full attribution. But we've been able to show there's a really clear ROI. We've looked at the return, which is 4 million, just over 4 million, and the costs. So the agency costs, our production costs, there's a small amount of media costs in there, and then also the likes of the client salary costs, those people who are responsible for managing that page, and we've been able to show kind of ROI of £5.80 for every pound that they invest. So I've probably talked a lot and gone a bit slower than I'd hoped. They kind of ICYMI is, in case you missed it, and really it's to kind of recap, is you really got to move beyond the number of fans and focusing on the number of fans. I suspect most of you have. Really think about engagement, think about business value, seek out some of those benchmarks, and as an industry there are lots, and they're getting better and more detailed. Ignore some of that value of fan hype, but set business objectives. Really, really important. Give your social media agency business objectives, and then share data with them. Share your sales data, share your CRM data, because ultimately this is really moving into kind of area of data marketing. And we talk about social as being brand performance marketing. To get the best out of your agency, you need to do those things. And the last thing is what we call kind of firing cannonballs and bullets. And bullets are lots of small, cheap things. And sometimes they miss the target completely, and sometimes they hit the target. And when they hit the target, we follow it up with a cannonball. So it's test and learn. But that approach is really important for social.
I think there's so much food for thought for me there that I've just got to go away and think about lots of things about what we need to do. But I do recognise that we need to be so much more sophisticated than this kind of likes and followers and those kinds of things.
We use social media as a vehicle to engage those audiences in a powerful way, and we get a lot of traction as a result of doing that.
The interesting thing about what I see what you're talking about is definitely on the Facebook side of it, is that how do you really rate whether or not somebody that's on Facebook, or whether or not they even go on to Facebook, really counts for anything?